Of late, I've been hearing that the AI bubble is bursting. Huzzah. I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical because every damn website I use has some sort of sparkly-ass nonsense in the corner asking if it can ruin my work. My email, my syllabus, my presentation software, our meeting software, my search engine, my web browser, my operating system. Shit, look down there. There's sparkles under my damn video. Our administrators want us to go to a conference to learn how to use AI in our classrooms. Some of our administrators admit openly to using AI to write their emails, and our union is worried they're doing it for faculty evaluations too. Back in 2015, the dean on Community decided to spend the college's IT budget on a cartoonishly impractical virtual reality system because...
The third dimension.
Reasons? Does the college need a virtual reality system?
Like a hole in the head.
Is this system suited to what they need or what they're trying to do?
Is that the volcano or the cobbler's workshop?
It's a monastery.
Not particularly. But the dean is convinced this is where things are heading.
These cabinets would never be this easy to climb in real life. This is the future of scrolling.
Is it stupid? Yes. Is it helpful? Absolutely not. But we've spent money on it, so we're committed now. Does this sound familiar yet? We keep getting told that AI is the future, that AI is inevitable, that we must get on board or get left behind. If you are old like me, you were also told this about 3D TV.
The world's first 3D LED TV.
The third dimension.
But you are almost certainly not that old. If you are slightly less old, you might remember that the Segway was going to revolutionize society and make walking feel as archaic as churning butter. But if you're younger than 30, you don't know what a Segway is, because the Segway was not the future. Even so, you probably remember when the metaverse was the future. Or when NFTs were the future, or when crypto was the future, or any of a half dozen cycles of doomed inevitability that we are still in the middle of. Self-driving cars will be here any minute, I'm sure of it. But for some reason, this particular imaginary future has got its claws into our education system, especially. If administrators are using AI to evaluate professors who are using AI to teach students who are using AI to pass classes, why the hell are any of us even here? In about 3 years, we've gone from humans teaching humans to navigate the world to robots teaching robots to use robots. I want to know why. Why were we so willing to give up so much so quickly? How has our education system actually achieved this level of stupid?
The font is larger.
I am afraid I know the answer. And the answer is not AI. Rather, I am afraid that something at the heart of our society, maybe even the thing that allows us to have a society, has already died. And what we call AI is a fungus spreading through the empty shell it left behind. Because how are we supposed to teach people about the world when we don't share a world anymore?
The Oscar goes to I Love My Life.
Tango the dog.
I can hear the AI bros in my comments already. AI is just a tool. It's the future. And if you're an educator, you need to be teaching students how to use it. You shouldn't imply that AI is the enemy of education. Well, on this at least, I think they're right. I should not imply that. Rather, I intend to argue it explicitly. AI is the enemy of education because large language models are epistemically incompatible with education. I promise I will unpack that pretentious-ass sentence as we go, but for now, let's just start here. If we think for a minute about the assumptions that the education system rests on, and compare them with the fundamental assumptions that enable large language models to function, it is not hard to see that on a foundational level, those things simply cannot coexist.
In other words, a bird may love a fish, But where would they build a home together?
So let me start with something stupidly simple. A necessary supposition for any education to exist is that it is possible for people to learn stuff. This is a prospect so basic that I feel like a bit of a dingus for needing to say it out loud, but if we accept that premise as valid, there are a series of equally obvious feeling conclusions that should be no more contentious, but that are, I think, at the heart of our world's dizzying collapse into fascism, and also are rather explanatory for why there is sparkle shit in all my apps now. If we accept the premise that it is possible to learn stuff, for example, it follows that some stuff is true, and some stuff is not true. If I ask who won the Oscar for Best Actor in 2002, someone who has learned the answer will provide a correct answer, and someone who has not will provide an incorrect answer. To plant a seed for later, we might say that education is defined by a concern with truth. Again, this seems obvious. That's why we have tests in school, right? That's why we do assessment, to ensure that students have learned the stuff that they were supposed to learn, and some have and some haven't, and it's possible to tell who knows a true thing and who doesn't. In order for us to have an education system, we must presume that some things are true and that other things are not true, and that it matters which is which. And this is why I say that AI is epistemically incompatible with education. Because as we'll see, large language models are, as a fundamental, inescapable design necessity, wholly unconcerned with truth. That is, ChatGPT is no more capable of telling the truth than a dog is of playing basketball. I understand, at least a little bit, how this problem came about. Let's say you're a dean.
Come on, I'm Dean, and my hands are so clean at this moment.
It's 2022, and you have a problem. The problem is AI. Everybody is freaking out about AI. You're starting to get complaints from students who are getting zeros on assignments because they use ChatGPT to write papers, and from professors who are expecting your support because all their students seem to be cheating now, and you've looked at all your college policies, and it turns out that
ain't no rules said the dog can't play basketball.
There's no policy on the books about it anywhere. There's nothing in the governance documents, nothing in the accreditation manuals, nothing in the catalog. Maybe you want it to go away, but right now, it sure doesn't look like it's going to go away. So you think, I should fight this, but the resources that you need to push back don't exist yet. And then you get an email.
You've got mail.
Maybe it's from your rep at Turnitin, who's starting to offer AI detection tools. Maybe someone tells you about ZeroGPT, and you Google it and click on one of the 5 slightly differently named companies that come up. But this feels like, well, the problem is solving itself, right? What if we used AI to fight AI? We can pay to have our own AI tools to fight the other AI tools, and doesn't that seem easier? I'm sorry, I'm sure that Viking doesn't mean anything.
It is always a temptation to an armed and agile nation to call upon a neighbour and to say, "We invaded you last night, we are quite prepared to fight, unless you pay us cash to go away." And that is called asking for Dane-geld, and the people who ask it explain that you've only to pay 'em the Dane-geld, and then you'll get rid of the Dane.
A question I get often about my last AI video is, why don't you want to have a policy? In a way, the whole video was intended to answer that question, but I don't think I ever articulated it to my own satisfaction. What I argued in that video is that a policy felt unnecessary to me because ultimately AI cannot write. It can absolutely string together words in a way that looks something like an essay, but it is not capable either of demonstrating the specific skills expected of academic writers or of performing the more fundamental task of writing, which is making a connection between minds. And if you disagree with me about that, at least go watch that video. You'll probably still disagree with me, but at least you'll understand where I'm coming from. But plenty of people who agreed with me about that still didn't get why I was so opposed to having a policy. If AI is becoming so inescapable, so easily accessible to students, so pervasive in our software, if it feels so much like an inevitability, then why wouldn't we want to have a policy? And so I've been thinking a lot about Airbud lately. More than is healthy, I'm sure. Airbud is, if you can believe it, an entire 98-minute motion picture with a story and everything. You might think, A dog who can play basketball is a whole movie? And the answer is no. It's either 6 or 15 whole movies, depending on how you count, in which Buddy the dog plays 5 different sports. But you don't know or care about that, and frankly, neither do I. The odds are very good that for you, the entirety of Air Bud is this clip.
Ain't no rules that the dog can't play basketball.
It is, however, true. There ain't no rule that says a dog can't play basketball. I've looked at the NBA rulebook, the NBA Constitution and bylaws, and the National Basketball Players Association Master Agreement. As far as I can tell, there ain't no rule. I will admit the NBA Constitution does include a definition of player, which includes the word person, but it does not include a definition of person that would exclude dog. So I'm pretty sure that truly there ain't no rule. Despite the staggering confidence on display in this tweet, I cannot find any record of a dog actually playing in the NBA. So why not? If there ain't no rule, why ain't there no dogs? For the moment, let's make the assumption that Buddy the dog's performance in Air Bud represents the peak expected performance of a dog playing basketball. I was worried that I would have to carefully watch the movie to break down Buddy's box scores, but thankfully John Oliver already did this for me.
Here's what we know about Air Bud, or Buddy, which is his given name, based on the game tape that is available to us. 2 steals, 5 assists, 2 free throws, and 4 field goals. That is it.
This is, mind you, against elementary school kids. In an ideal situation versus 11-year-olds, with the benefit of Hollywood writers and special effects crews, Buddy can put up numbers that are slightly below mid. This is why we don't see a lot of dogs in the NBA, because dogs can't fucking play basketball. There doesn't need to be a rule that says a gerbil can't be a heart surgeon or that a rutabaga can't be an airline pilot, because they just fucking can't. Dogs can't play basketball. As much as I complained about it in my last video, I have begrudgingly adopted an AI policy for my classes. As it happens, the most important part of my policy is, in fact, that essential truth. Dogs can't play basketball. You don't need to make a rule against something impossible. So, what does it mean large language models are epistemically incompatible with education? The easy part here is large language models. AI, as I hope you've realized by now, is more of a marketing term than anything else. It covers a lot of different and overlapping technologies, none of which particularly resemble what we meant when we imagined artificial intelligence even 5 years ago. Large language models, or LLMs, are the kinds of so-called AI systems that generate text, so things like ChatGPT, Gemini, Grok, and the like. The scarier word here is epistemically. Epistemology is a very large and pretentious-feeling word that describes a question that is increasingly important for normal, non-pretentious people. The question epistemology describes is this: how do we decide when we know something? My daughter is 5, for example, and her way of knowing is based largely on my wife and I. If she encounters a question or an uncertainty, she asks us and we answer her, and our answers become her knowledge. She knows it because we said it. And this works pretty okay when you're 5, and the way it works is by offloading epistemic responsibility onto us. How does she decide what she knows? She makes us do it. Different parents will answer the same question differently based on their own ways of knowing, and in so doing, they'll pass those ways of knowing on to their kid. When we use any of these different ways of answering a kid question, we're also teaching the kid something about where knowledge comes from. These are all different frameworks for how we might come to know something. They're different, they overlap, sometimes they conflict with each other and sometimes they don't, sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. Some work better on some questions than others. Neither the Bible nor the scientific literature, for example, have anything to say about whether a dog can play basketball. And we know, of course, that there are some things that we cannot know for sure. But as we've already stipulated, the idea of education rests on the assumption that we can and do know some things, and that there are standards of knowing that we have to meet in order to treat something as true. Case in point. I used to teach my students about a scientific study. And having taught my students about that study for some years, I heard myself talking about it, and I realized I was tripping my own bullshit detector pretty alarmingly. I was telling my students about a study, but I hadn't seen the study. I didn't have a citation. This was a study that I had learned about in college some decades previously. When I realized that I hadn't actually seen this study that I was telling my students about, I tried to track it down, and I couldn't find it. The person who had seen the study wasn't me, it was my professor. So obviously I asked him. And it turns out he didn't have the citation either. He had learned about it from his professor in grad school, which is to say this thing I was teaching my students as a scientific study ultimately boiled down to, I know a guy who knew a guy who said he read a paper once. The I know a guy who knew a guy who said he read a paper once standard of knowing is maybe good enough for the moment when 3 beers deep a friend asks me what I think about Air Bud. But like we said, education is defined by a concern with truth. So in an academic context, this doesn't make the cut for knowing. Now, it's possible that the study happened and that it showed exactly the results that my professor and I remember, but that kind of doesn't matter. The standards of knowing that we hold in the academy say that if I am to claim it is true, I have to be able to produce the study. If I had the citation, if I could read and evaluate the study myself, I could show it to you now and say, I know this, but I can't, so I don't. This is why I was so mad about this citation in the last video and the kind of AI-generated false citations I see in student work constantly. A citation is a declaration of fact. This study happened. It was reported on in this place. And no matter how perfect the MLA format is, an AI-generated citation cannot be correct if the study it is citing may not exist. The knowing comes from the fact that the study happened. In my case, I cannot demonstrate with confidence that the study I was describing to my students happened, let alone produce a verifiable record of its results. Therefore, what I and my own professor 15 years earlier, sorry to throw you under the bus here, Carl, what we were teaching our students was, on a technical level, bullshit. In his seminal work on the topic on bullshit, philosopher Harry G. Frankfurt spends about 11 pages dissecting a 4-sentence anecdote Fania Pascal related about Wittgenstein. Recovering from a tonsillectomy, Pascal says, I feel like a dog that's been run over. And Wittgenstein, disgusted, replies, you don't know what a dog that's been run over feels like. As Frankfurt sees it, Wittgenstein's disgust arises because Pascal's analogy is
unconnected to a concern with truth.
Or, more cuttingly,
not germane to the enterprise of describing reality. She does not even think she knows, except in the vaguest way, how a run-over dog feels. Her description of her own feeling is, accordingly, something that she is merely making up. She concocts it out of whole cloth, or, if she got it from someone else, she is repeating it quite mindlessly and without any regard for how things really are.
The problem with what Pascal was doing, and with what I and my own professor were doing in reporting on that study, is not merely that we were wrong.
Her fault is not that she fails to get things right, but that she is not even trying. He construes her as engaged in an activity to which the distinction between what is true and what is false is crucial, and yet as taking no interest in whether what she says is true or false.
This, for Frankfurt, is the essential nature of bullshit.
Although it is produced without concern with the truth, it need not be false. The bullshitter is faking things, but this does not mean that he necessarily gets them wrong.
When I said this a moment ago, some of you went, aha, what if the study ChatGPT is citing does exist? Because while it is certainly true that LLMs will enthusiastically and cavalierly provide citations for articles that do not exist, for studies that never took place, sometimes it also will provide citations for studies that do exist. If I were arguing that LLMs are incompatible with education because what they produce is wrong, this would be an extremely valid rebuttal. And in fact, this is how conversations about AI and truth tend to go. People argue about the frequency with which AI is wrong and whether that frequency is increasing or decreasing and what kind of error rate is acceptable. But that is not what I am arguing. I am arguing that LLMs are epistemically incompatible with education because education is defined by a concern with truth. So if we are to be persuaded that there is any place for AI in the education system, then, if we are to invite these sparkles into our colleges and our classrooms, if we are going to spend our education money on these programs, we must first become convinced of this. Is AI defined by a concern with truth? Can we come back to the dean? Because something about this is feeling more and more familiar. So, let's say you're a dean.
Come on, I'm Dean, and my hands are so clean.
No, let's say you're the dean of Greendale Community College. It's 2011 and your name is Craig Pelton, and you have just been promoted to series regular on the hit sitcom Community, but there's no time for that because you have a problem. The problem is the study group.
This isn't a symbol for the crossroads of ideas. I now know it's a but. Yeah.
They have stolen your space simulator, they have misappropriated the college's advertising budget, and they have shut down operations with a blanket fort, and that was all just in the last year. And now they have let a monkey loose in your vents.
Will not tolerate monkeys living on campus. If I wanted to run a monkey hotel, I'd install a banana buffet.
This gang of unhinged weirdos is destroying your college over and over again, and you have no idea what to do. Nothing you learned at Dean School prepared you for this. There's nothing in Dean Magazine about monkey infestations. And on top of everything else, you just had to let most of your security team go for budget reasons.
Okay, as it turns out, I cannot pay this. Or your salary starting on 2 weeks ago.
I can't say this part in the Dean voice because he'd never admit it. But maybe you want the study group to go away. But right now, it sure doesn't look like they're gonna go away. And every time they cause another calamity, which is pretty much every week, you think, I should fight this, but the resources you need simply don't exist. And then you get an email. Okay, not an email, a man falls out of your seat. It is one of the unhinged weirdos. Perhaps even the most unhinged.
Okay, I'm the one living in your vents.
And he needs a job and a place to stay, and that feels like, well, maybe the problem is solving itself. Maybe it's time for a Chang of tactics. What if we use this unhinged weirdo to fight the other unhinged weirdos? We can bring Chang on as a security guard, and he'll keep the study group in check. And, well, doesn't that just seem easier?
Requests for increased security. Cooler uniforms, I like that. Power to enact martial law, not so much.
Besides, what could possibly go wrong?
And a 1, a 2, a Chang, Chang, Chang 4.
And why are all of these Vikings here?
It is always a temptation for a rich and lazy nation to puff and look important and to say, though we know we should defeat you, we have not the time to meet you, we will therefore pay you cash to go away. And that is called paying the Dane-geld, but we've proved it again and again that if once you have paid him the Dane-geld, you never get rid of the Dane.
I shouldn't let this bother me, because I just don't think this is true. Because there doesn't have to be a rule. The rules don't need to specify no dogs, because what they require is expertise. A dog cannot cultivate the expertise necessary to play professional basketball. Thus, we don't need rules to exclude them specifically, because they are already excluded by the existing standards of expertise. This is, in my view, why we don't need to have AI policies, because AI should already be excluded from use in educational settings by the existing standards of expertise. Let's return to the premises that underlie an education system. If we accept that it is possible to tell who knows something and who doesn't, it is then possible to start categorizing people based on who knows a given thing. We do this all the time. This is what we are doing when we require people to have licenses to do things like drive cars or fly planes or perform surgery. Our society relies on taxonomies of who knows what stuff. If a thing is complicated, then we need some mechanism to know that the person doing it knows the stuff they need to know in order to do the thing. Our society depends on our ability to trust in expertise. This seems straightforward and unobjectionable, right? Sure. If we need a decision about whether a particular drug is effective in treating a specific disease, for example, it would be unobjectionable to assemble a panel of people who have the right kind of knowledge, have them evaluate the available information, and make a determination. And it would be equally unobjectionable to people who don't have that kind of knowledge to accept that determination. After all, the people who know the stuff should be the people who do the thing. Well, about that.
The FDA has been crystal clear. A horse dewormer should never be used to treat or try to prevent COVID-19. But that's not stopping popular podcaster Joe Rogan.
This, I think, is a large part of why AI is taking over education so invasively. In a way, AI is exploiting an opening created by a larger, scarier failure: the death of expertise. What we are experiencing right now is called epistemic collapse. A collapse is when a system fails or falls. In this case, what is collapsing, or has collapsed, depending on who you ask, is our system for knowing. We no longer have shared assumptions about which processes can reveal truth. It doesn't matter how compelling or categorical the scientific evidence against ivermectin's effectiveness in treating COVID-19 is, because we no longer share a trust in science, or in expertise at all for that matter. There is no trust in expertise because all information is now presumed to be politicized. In other words, everybody thinks that fake news is a big problem, but everyone also thinks it's the other side's news that is fake. In his book, The Death of Expertise, Tom Nichols has attempted to reckon with this epistemic collapse on two separate occasions. In the first edition, published in 2017, Nichols' argument was characterized by a certain dark optimism. He believed that we would encounter a major crisis and we would be forced to rely on experts to get through it. And then COVID-19 hit. So in 2023, Nichols revised and expanded the book with the theme of those revisions more or less being, well, shit. Nichols sums up the epistemic collapse he calls the death of expertise as
a panoply of deeply mistaken beliefs held by many citizens that experts should be pushed aside, and that almost any challenge, from running a lab to running a country, is relatively easy, and that almost anyone can do it if they watch enough YouTube videos.
In short, the death of expertise
is a different problem than the historical fact of low levels of information among laypeople. The issue is not indifference to established knowledge, it's the emergence of a positive hostility to such knowledge. This is new in American culture, and it represents the aggressive replacement of expert views or established knowledge with the insistence that every opinion on any matter is as good as every other. This is a remarkable change in our public discourse.
And of course, we are all thinking about this chucklehead, right? There's a part of me that wishes that Nichols had waited 2 more years to revisit the death of expertise, because it is hard to imagine a more powerful avatar of epistemic collapse than the current Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert fucking Kennedy Jr., the anti-vaxxer who has been put in charge of vaccines. Air Bud is competitive at more than basketball. But he also plays football, soccer, baseball, and volleyball. I'll spare us all from another bizarre research expedition, and we'll just presume that the ain't no rule maxim applies to those sports too, and that dogs could, in reality, play those sports if they were competitive. But of course, they don't, because they aren't. And so I keep thinking about Air Bud and the world his movies imagine, a world where expertise is so thoroughly eroded that we're meant to believe a dog can be as good as a person at more or less anything. I'm thinking of the coach for the other team. Not the Timberwolves, the team that is about to lose to a dog. The coach who hears there ain't no rule and responds like this.
This is a joke. Dogs don't play basketball.
What's the matter, gentlemen? Afraid your team might get beat by a dog?
Put him in!
He ends up on the losing side in this movie, but he shares my faith. He's not afraid. He believes in the basic truth that people are better than dogs at basketball, and that expertise, even the perhaps meager level of expertise that we might ascribe to an elementary school basketball team, means something. Unfortunately, the movie he is in does not share that faith. It wasn't alone. If Hollywood believed one thing around the turn of the century, it was that athletes really just kind of suck, because almost anything can destabilize a professional sport. Certainly this one incredibly powerful dog, but also a chimp, a kid who got Tommy John surgery, a kid with magic shoes, direct divine intervention on behalf of another kid, Adam Sandler, and, let's not forget, Goofy. I think Happy Gilmore is perhaps the most instructive film in this canon, given Happy's pure, delighted disdain for the sport he is upending. And there's something about Happy Gilmore that feels honest in a way that the other movies don't. And that is how dumb this movie thinks golf is. Despite all these movies being nominally about sports, they don't have what Frankfurt might describe as a concern for sports. This, for example, is how Happy Gilmore wins the PGA Tour Championship. 3 months ago in the timeline of the film, Happy was not a golfer, he was a burnout hockey schmuck that couldn't skate. His drive looks like this. One time Charles Barkley got the yips and spent the better part of a decade trying to fix a swing like that because in reality, that is not an effective way to golf. This is not what expert driving looks like. To accept that Happy could, in a period of 90 days, win the PGA Tour Championship like this,
Oh my God!
requires us to set aside everything we know about golf as a sport. The PGA Tour Championship is a real event. It exists in our reality. Therefore, Happy Gilmore requires us to believe that golf, as played by real golfers, is subordinate to whatever Rube Goldberg nonsense this is. Happy Gilmore, both as a film and as a character, wants us to accept that golf as a sport is dumb and prissy, and the right jackass could come in with a slap shot and knock the whole thing over. The butt of the joke is the idea that golf is a real sport. The core premise of the film is that golf is, when you get right down to it, bullshit. The Air Bud movies are less forthright about this, and in some ways that makes them feel even worse to me. In Air Bud, Buddy's putting up mediocre numbers against school kids. But in Air Bud 7th Inning Fetch, Buddy manages to get the series ending out for the Anaheim Angels and win Most Valuable Player in the World Series. I want you to notice the cut here. Watch Buddy, who's in fact played by at least 5 different canine actors, make the catch and then turn casually toward home plate, where presumably his trainer is standing. And then, after a cut, watch Buddy, in fact possibly a different canine actor, walk to the bag and tag the runner out. The cut suggests to me that the dog couldn't do this in one take, and I have my reasons for that suspicion, but for now let's set that aside. We don't have to criticize the canine actors here to look at the character's performance, and by that standard, it's not great baseball. For one thing, Buddy doesn't hustle here. This is a sort of casual mosey at best. And wiser baseball fans than I have pointed out that he probably never should have left the bag to begin with. And the only reason Buddy even gets the out is that the runner is, in one expert's estimation, slow as fuck. But in the world of this movie, this is World Series MVP performance. Obviously, it's a kid's movie. Obviously, it's fiction. Obviously, the point is the suspension of disbelief. But I want us to notice also what we are being asked to suspend our belief in. To accept Buddy as the World Series MVP, we're not merely being asked to believe that a dog is really good at baseball. We are being shown a dog playing baseball at this level. And we are being asked to believe that no Major League Baseball player is better at baseball than this. In essence, we're being told that there is no such thing as expertise. We are being asked to suspend our belief that human experts could do better than this dog. This is why I started this video with a meditation on the 2002 Academy Awards for Best Actor in a Motion Picture. As Air Bud demonstrates, dogs can act. And there are people who make a compelling case that there should be Oscars for canine actors. And as the most dog person I know, I firmly support this. In his video, Will talks about how challenging an environment film sets are for dogs and how much canine actors can add to the films that they're a part of.
Now, dogs aren't just set dressing. They contribute in identifiable ways to the success of the film that they feature in. Okay, so you normally won't have a dog named on the poster, they won't be top billed, but many films rely on animal performances to work. Sometimes this is just individual.
We all know of movies where we have relationships with the dog characters, and we've all seen movies where a shitty performance from a dog has pulled us out of the experience. Dogs can act. But crucially, what Will is arguing here is that there should be a Best Canine Actor category, not that dogs should be eligible for Best Actor. This was funny to make and it's funny to think about, and again, I love dogs more than anyone I know, but if we imagine this actually happening in real life, how would that feel? For me, the idea that Tango's performance is on par with Denzel's isn't just insulting to Denzel. It's insulting to the entire craft of acting. If this were real, it would feel to me incredibly disrespectful. What Tango can do is an incredible feat for a dog, but it is not equivalent to what Denzel can do, or Will Smith, or Russell Crowe, or Sean Penn, or Tom Wilkinson. When I ask you to imagine that this performance was the best performance given by any actor in 2002, I am asking you to suspend your belief that there is any difference between what a human is capable of and what a dog is capable of. And this is what Airbud and Happy Gilmore and the rest are asking us to imagine when their protagonists topple the pros. It is what the dean accepted when he imagined that Chang could do as well as his trained security staff, and it is what Sam Altman is going to try to sneak into our worldview a little bit later in this video. The idea that there is no difference between the best performance a human expert is capable of and bullshit. Okay, I promise I'm coming back to ChatGPT here, but first, Airbud 7th Inning Fetch also poses one last epistemic question, which also turns out to be shockingly relevant to the role of AI in education. And that question is, was Airbud playing baseball? Given what we saw in that clip, he clearly catches the throw from his second baseman, runs back to his bag, and tags the very slow runner out. If we stipulate that these actions took place as depicted in an actual World Series game, then yes, these actions from this dog would result in this leisurely wanderer being called out. There is no question that the actual dog is performing these actions, but there's also no question that this dog does not know what baseball as a sport is. Without the specific coaching of their trainers to perform specific actions, this dog would not know which actions to perform. To play a sport is not merely to take the actions that the sport entails, but to do so intentionally, understanding the game one is playing. And in that sense, a dog cannot play baseball. Likewise, every conversation it is possible to have with ChatGPT is based on a lie. Specifically, ChatGPT can make mistakes. In a 2024 article for Ethics in Information Technology that I won't tell you the title of yet, Michael Townsend Hicks, James Humphreys, and Joe Slater argue that an LLM like ChatGPT cannot make mistakes because in order to make a mistake, one must intend to be accurate. And LLMs, they argue, have no such intent.
The problem here isn't that large language models hallucinate, lie, or misrepresent the world in some way. It's that they are not designed to represent the world at all. Instead, they are designed to convey convincing lines of text.
This is true, they argue, because of the technology that undergirds LLMs. Hicks and company attempt to simplify this in a paragraph which includes the phrase high-dimensional vector space, in which therefore I will not attempt to oversimplify further, but to sum up, they say,
an LLM's goal is to provide a normal-seeming response to a prompt, not to convey information that is helpful to their interlocutor.
In other words, the mechanism that drives an LLM asks, based on my training data, what words are likely to occur in sequence with other words. And that, you might notice, is not a question that has anything to do with truth. So, they argue, to characterize false statements generated by an LLM as hallucination is to misrepresent what is happening.
Many popular discussions of ChatGPT call its false statements hallucinations. One might also think of these untruths as lies. However, we argue that this isn't the right way to think about it. These untruths aren't lies, but instead are bullshit.
That's the title of the article, by the way. ChatGPT is bullshit. And that's easy to say casually. Bullshit is, generally speaking, a fairly casual term. If, in real life, a dog won the World Series MVP, every single baseball player and fan might reasonably say that is some bullshit. But when Hicks et al. Use the term, that is not what they mean. They are using bullshit as a term of art. Relying heavily on Frankfurt's definition from earlier, they argue that text generated by LLMs is necessarily produced without a concern for truth.
ChatGPT is not designed to produce true utterances. Rather, it is designed to produce text which is indistinguishable from the text produced by humans. It is aimed at being convincing rather than accurate. The basic architecture of these models reveals this. They are designed to come up with a likely continuation of a string of text. It's reasonable to assume that one way of being a likely continuation of a text is by being true. If humans are roughly more accurate than chance, true sentences will be more likely than false ones. This might make the chatbot more accurate than chance, but it does not give the chatbot any intention to convey truths.
In my ongoing project of being weird to my friends on Discord for videos, I rolled a D100 in the Patreon server I share with several other creators. Most people on the server, most people in general, I guess, have an age that is somewhere between 1 and 100. Kevin and Evie and Artemis are all not 31. Does that mean the D100 was wrong? No, that's stupid. But wait.
Me am.
Sam am 31. How did it know? How did the D100 know how old Sam is? Of course not. That is also stupid. That is not what the D100 is doing. Likewise, that LLMs are sometimes correct is immaterial to the fact that what they produce is bullshit. What matters is that an LLM
does not and cannot care about the truth of its output.
That's not what an LLM is doing. Even if it's right, it is not telling the truth because LLMs operate at a basic level without concern for truth. And as we have seen, education is defined by a concern with truth. Thus, LLMs are epistemically incompatible with education, and can somebody please do something about these Vikings? Okay. Fine. You're not the dean, you're the king. No, of England. No, not that one, this one. And you have a problem. The problem is Vikings. Everybody's freaking out about the Vikings. They're raiding your villages, they're pillaging, they're burning, they're killing your people, and that feels not great. You're starting to get complaints from the peasants that all their crops have been destroyed, and from your thanes who are expecting your support because they got to do something about these invaders. It's 8991, by the way. Your uncle Æthelred had pretty much gotten rid of the Vikings before you were even born, so you thought this was a solved problem. The resources you need to push back just don't exist anymore. And then you get an email. Okay, almost certainly not an email. This dude Olaf says that he can get rid of the Vikings, and he's got to be legit because he is the king of the Vikings. And this feels like, well, the problem's kind of solving itself, right? What if we used Vikings to fight Vikings? We can pay to have our own Viking army to fight the other Viking army, and doesn't that just seem easier? It seemed easier to King Æthelred II. He paid off the Vikings in 991, and then they came back in 994, and he paid them off again, and then again in AD 1002, and in 1007, and in 1012. But when they came back in AD 1013, Æthelred tried something different. He just got conquered, and then for a while the King of England just was a Viking. This practice, paying the Vikings to fight the Vikings, hiring Chang to fight the study group, using AI to fight AI, is called paying the Dane-geld, which is how Rudyard Kipling came to be writing about the role of AI in education back in 1911. To quote the poet,
and that is called paying the Dane-geld, but we've proved it again and again that if once you have paid him the Dane-geld, you never get rid of the Dane.
In his second confirmation hearing in the Senate, our dog athlete Secretary of Health and Human Services told the story of Frances Kelsey, the woman largely responsible for preventing the FDA from approving thalidomide. Thalidomide was a drug that caused immeasurable harm to developing fetuses in Europe and the rest of the world during the 50s and 60s. I really hate to let RFK Jr. ramble in my video for this long, but bear with me, we kind of need the whole thing. Here's how he told that story.
In 1963, my uncle awarded John F. Kennedy the highest civilian honor to Frances Kelsey. Frances Kelsey was a young scientist at NIH who came in and objected to the panel having approved thalidomide for American children. All the scientists that day, they were doing it in Europe, all the scientists that day and the scientific panels that worked for the agency approved, green-lighted thalidomide. She stood up and screamed and fought and risked her job and risked her reputation, and she blocked it in our country. My uncle gave her the highest civilian honor because she questioned science and was courageous enough to stand up and say, I don't care what happens to me, this cannot happen.
Kennedy's version of this story is wrong in a way that is epistemically destructive. If you are interested in Kelsey's story, which you should be, it's amazing, the podcast Lost Women of Science did a 5-part series on her last year, which is how I learned about both Kelsey's story and Kennedy's misrepresentation of it. It is true that thalidomide was heavily prescribed to pregnant women in Europe and that countless kids suffered injuries during development because of it. It's true that Kelsey was the driving force at the FDA, which prevented thalidomide from gaining FDA approval, and it's true that John F. Kennedy awarded Kelsey the President's Award for Distinguished Federal Service in 1962. Secretary Kennedy is not misrepresenting Kelsey's achievements here. What he's misrepresenting is science itself. Kelsey did not receive the President's Award because she questioned science. She earned it because she demanded science. She insisted on science. Kelsey did not object to the panel having approved thalidomide. She was on the panel. In her memoir, Kelsey explains that her area of responsibility was clinical trials, and her reason for holding back thalidomide's application was, fundamentally, a scientific one.
The claims made in the new drug application for thalidomide were too glowing for the support in the way of clinical backup. The claims were just not supported by the type of clinical studies that had been submitted in the application. Many of the submitted reports were more testimonials than scientific studies. That was the good bulk of them.
According to Kelsey, there was an expectation from the manufacturer that the drug would be easily approved.
With thalidomide, because it had been successfully marketed in Europe, I think one of the possible reasons why Merrill's application was so poor was that it seemed like a sort of pushover, that it would have no problem at all being approved. Perhaps they'd not given the application the attention it deserved.
Kelsey asked for more evidence. Kelsey asked for more evidence to support the manufacturer's claims of safety. She asked for scientific explanations for certain problems reported on in the scientific literature but not addressed in the application. She demanded that the manufacturer ask specific questions of the investigating doctors whose testimonials they were presenting as evidence of thalidomide safety. And once enough rumors of problems bubbled up to the level of her attention, she asked specifically for a clinical trial looking at the impacts of long-term use during pregnancy. This was Kelsey demanding scientific rigor. From an epistemic perspective, science says that we know things based on the accumulation of observed evidence. If we don't have observed evidence, we don't have knowledge. So when Kelsey said to Merrill, who by the way, on another day, Secretary Chucklefuck might derogate as Big Pharma, when Kelsey said we can't know this drug is safe until we have adequate observed evidence, she was using her expertise as a pharmacologist and doctor to invoke the primacy of a shared epistemic standard. It is this epistemic standard that Nichols mourns in The Death of Expertise when he writes,
although people commonly use the word evidence, they use it too loosely. The tendency in conversation is to use evidence to mean things which I perceive to be true, rather than things which have been subjected to a test of their factual nature by agreed upon rules.
And when we lose our ability not just to agree on who's right and who's wrong, but that it's even possible for one of us to be wrong in an externally verifiable way, then sure, why not say that Tylenol causes autism? This is Sam Altman, chowderhead-in-chief of OpenAI and ChatGPT's rabid stage parent at a live stream from August. He does not know what to do with his hands, but what he is doing with his mouth is, and again I mean this technically, bullshit.
But with GPT-5, now it's like talking to an expert, a legitimate PhD-level expert in anything, any area you need, on demand, that can help you with whatever your goals are.
A legitimate PhD-level expert in anything. The internet, of course, had a field day with this, because in addition to being bullshit in the Frankfurtian sense, it also happens to be obviously false. For example, Dr. Chatbot's favorite presidents include Henbert Bowen and Ben Loheen Barrison, who presumably hail from the states of Niawa and respectively. His favorite part of the possum is a toss-up between the foot called nose and the foot called tail. Also, because the researcher who asked for the possum diagram made a typo, we also know that Dr. Chatbot's favorite part of the posse is the fanned. Altman promised us that GPT-5 was a PhD-level expert on August 7th, and he had rolled back to GPT-4o by August 13th. And sorry, but I couldn't help myself. The timeline ChatGPT made for me mentions neither the release of GPT-5 nor the rollback to GPT-4o, and seems to have just plonked 4 random dates on there attached to some vague marketing text. Obviously, Altman's line here is marketing pablum, one of the most ancient and venerated forms of bullshit, and if I'm honest, one of the least offensive to me personally. The fact that Altman is using bullshit to sell a product nobody wants to a market he has spent his career attempting, with at least some success, to manufacture, that doesn't bother me much. Everyone in the audience expects him to overpromise, in the same way that every cell provider is going to say they have the best network in the country. But there's something worse here. The specific bullshit claims that he is making are, I think, more dangerous and more insidious, because he's using the instrumental bullshit of marketing to do more than simply hype ChatGPT. He's using it to reframe reality. This particular bit of bullshit that ChatGPT is a PhD level expert does epistemic violence in and of itself, because again, by any meaningful definition, it is false. Expert is a complex word to define, which is why Tom Nichols spends most of a chapter doing so in The Death of Expertise. Nichols introduces his exploration like this.
True expertise, the kind of knowledge on which others rely, is an intangible but recognizable combination of education, talent, experience, and peer affirmation. Each of these is a mark of expertise, but most people would rightly judge how all of them are combined in a given subject or professional field when deciding whose advice to trust.
Expertise, then, is not just information. One thing that a PhD has that ChatGPT does not, for example, is a fucking PhD. In the academy in the US, we have a useful designation, ABD. It stands for All But Dissertation. And what it signifies is that someone has completed all the required coursework to earn their PhD, but they have not yet defended their dissertation. An ABD, to be clear, is not a PhD. This is not me being snarky about credentials. I don't have a PhD, in case you're curious. Rather, I want you to notice the word defended.
Look carefully at an actual college degree, Nichols writes, and note what most of them actually say, that the bearer has been examined by the faculty and admitted to the degree, which is in turn backed by a committee of schools in that region or a body representing a particular profession. Those faculties and the associations who accredit their courses of study are in effect vouching for the graduate's knowledge of a particular subject. The name of the school or institution, no less than the degree holder, is on the line, at least as an initial affirmation of capability.
In order to earn a PhD, a candidate must demonstrate to a panel of experts in their field not only that they have knowledge, but that they can use that knowledge to perform scholarship according to the conventions and best practices of their discipline. Defending a dissertation is the defining feature of earning a PhD because it is the process by which the community of experts in a field vet and acknowledge one of their own. ChatGPT has never earned that acknowledgement in any field, let alone in every field. To be more blunt, a PhD candidate who treats facts with the same haphazard casualness as ChatGPT never gets a PhD, because that kind of bullshit will not make it past the panel. And of course, that is not where it stops. A bad lawyer can be disbarred, a bad doctor can lose their license, a bad Major League Baseball player can get booted back to the minors. As Nichols says,
every professional group and expert community has its watchdogs, boards, accreditors, and certification authorities, whose job it is to police its own members and to ensure not only that they live up to the standards of their own specialty, but also that their arts are practiced only by people who actually know what they're doing.
A PhD has a specific meaning. It is indeed a measure of expertise, but that expertise does not lie in the raw quantity of accumulated facts a PhD has in their mental corpus. It lies in other experts' evaluation of how someone uses that information. As Nichols says it,
knowing things is not the same as understanding them. Comprehension is not the same thing as analysis. Expertise is not a parlor game played with factoids.
Altman is not merely overpromising on what a product can do. He is actively eroding the concept of expertise. He is telling people that the only difference between someone who has spent decades studying in a field and a random guy off the street is the amount of information they have access to. And now, Altman says falsely, they both have access to the same information. Altman is producing bullshit, but he's also perpetuating the idea that everything is bullshit, that nobody can tell the difference between fact and fabrication, that nobody knows better than anyone else, and that you can always be right just by deciding everyone else is wrong. And once we are that deep in bullshit, how do we find our way back to reality? I've been lying to you. Okay, no, I haven't. At least not by normal human standards. It is more accurate to say that I have posed a hypothetical which contains an unavoidable inaccuracy.
The Oscar goes to I Love My Life.
Tango the dog.
Specifically, this is not Tango. There are 5 canine actors credited as Buddy in Air Bud's 7th inning fetch, and by God, I wanted to make sure that my hypothetical Oscar went to the right dog. Is this stupid? Probably. Does the answer to this question exist on the internet? Almost certainly not. Eventually, I came to the conclusion that nobody knew who this specific dog in this specific scene was because nobody had ever cared about that question before this exact moment, except possibly for Bonnie Judd, the head animal trainer for Air Bud's 7th inning fetch. So, obviously, I asked her. I wasn't expecting a reply, if I'm being honest. I know what I'm like, and if someone asked me the kinds of question I asked people, I'd just back away slowly. Thankfully, though, Judd was gracious enough to give me one of the most fascinating half hours of conversation I have ever had. I learned a great many things from that chat, but there are 3 that matter here. First, I know that this is not Tango. It is good that I am not on camera here, because if I were, you would see the light of frenzy in my eyes and know that I am forsaken by God and reason both when I tell you that this dog is not credited. This dog is an amateur. This dog is some dog off the street. This scene and this scene alone featured a different dog from an outside trainer that does not appear in the credits. Do you feel the heat of my desire to find this man and this dog? It is consuming me. But it could not matter less to the actual argument I am making, and so I must stop myself here and simply apologize to this dog. Sorry, dog. I do not know who you are because you are not in the credits, so I cannot give you your imaginary Oscar by name. I've never met you, but I know that you're a good dog. Second, I know that my impulse was right. It matters which dog I gave the imaginary Oscar to. In using Air Bud as a metaphor for AI, I have been giving far too much credit to the machine and not enough credit at all to the genuine expertise of the dogs. As Ms. Judd talked to me about the canine actors she worked with on 7th Inning Fetch more than 2 decades ago, what I heard from her was an appreciation of their craft. She told me that Tango was sensible and kind and calm and great with kids, and Shooter, on the other hand, was energetic. They'd use Shooter for the action scenes. Shaq, she said, had a great big head, which I think she meant both literally and figuratively, that he's expressive, emotive, telegenic. Shaq, she said, is the one that they would use for close-ups because of that big ol' hod. Our conversation was brief, so I wasn't able to confirm this shot by shot, but even decades later, she gave me enough to feel like I can tell which of these actors is which because these dogs, in their way, are experts. Finally, I know that the death of expertise has hit Hollywood too. Judd told me that increasingly animal actors are being crowded out by, to no one's surprise, I'm sure, AI. In the world of Tilly Norwood Digital Virgin, it is easy to miss that Hollywood has been replacing actors with AI for some time. They just started with animals. You can feel the difference. She used a metaphor from her own expertise. I might see a dog in a movie, she said, and see that the whites of his eyes are visible, and his ears are back, and his tongue is curled, and I know that those are all signs that the dog is stressed. Normal people maybe don't know what those markers mean, but they can still feel it. They can tell that something is not right. AI is like that, she said. They may not know what they're seeing, but they know it isn't real. She didn't know my video was about AI or any of the other things that I've dumped on you over the course of this video. And she didn't quote Harry Frankfurt, but she may as well have. AI is not germane to the project of describing reality. But ultimately, what she said about AI is the same thing that I've been saying. Even if we don't know what we're seeing, we know it isn't real. It is not concerned with truth. But what if it is true, though? I don't think it's true, and anybody can tweet anything, obviously. But this is a bananas thing to tweet for no reason, right? I tried searching for dog on basketballreference.com, but that just gets me a bunch of people whose nickname was Big Dog and the like. Wikipedia says the shortest NBA player in league history is Muggsy Bogues at 5'3", and surely there's not a dog taller than that, right? But that doesn't seem definitive. I'm sure that it's not true, and yet he tweets. I don't know who JP Brammer is, but what if he knows something I don't, right? Where did this tweet come from? Why would he tweet this? So, obviously, I asked him. My compulsive need to research the absurd cannot tolerate even a brief delay, so while I waited for his response, I kept Googling. So, when JP Brammer graciously responded to my absurd questions, I found myself in the delightful position of being able to tell him that, no, that's not why you tweeted that. Because, funny story, Brammer's tweet was posted on May 22nd, 2024. That is almost exactly 1 week after Google made this announcement. Just like with Altman's PhD announcement, the actual people of the internet immediately went, that sounds like bullshit, and started cataloging the absurd non-facts that Google's AI overview spat out. Cheese not sticking to your pizza? Just add glue. When did Andrew Jackson graduate from college? 2005. How many rocks should I eat every day? At least one. Has a dog ever played in the NBA? Has a dog ever played in the NBA? And there it is. Pure and perfect, the source of this tweet. J.P. Brammer, bless him, did not know something I didn't, and once I made my case, he confirmed my interpretation. This dumb tweet has haunted me throughout this essay because it was the only affirmative statement I found about the question. I didn't believe it is true, but why did he post it? And the answer is bullshit. J.P. Brammer was making fun of AI bullshit, and Gemini's bullshit filtered through Patrick Cosmos and J.P. Brammer has been floating in the back of my mind, making me doubt the obvious fact that a dog can't fucking play basketball. So, Airbud F. Kennedy Jr. is trying to stop pregnant people from taking Tylenol because, well, it's hard to say. Because he wants to be the guy who cured autism, I think. Although, for the record, the idea that autism is something that should be cured or prevented is in itself pretty fucked up, and in a just world, we will soon look back on the people who wanted to cure autism as monstrously fuck-headed in the same way that people who tried to cure left-handedness were. But also because I suspect Kennedy truly believes the scientists who have studied autism for years don't know any more about it than he does. Because to Kennedy, what he believes is science and everything else is political.
Despite the cataclysmic impact of the epidemic on our nation's children, we are now replacing the institutional culture of politicized science and corruption with evidence-based medicine.
And this is the heart of epistemic collapse. Things I believe are evidence, things I don't are politics.
The tendency in conversation is to use evidence to mean things which I perceive to be true, rather than things which have been subjected to a test of their factual nature by agreed upon rules.
Furthermore, thanks also to the politicization of science, the safety of acetaminophen against the risk of neurodevelopmental disorders in young children has never been validated.
Can you believe that? People won't even study it. Anyway, here's a Swedish study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association where they looked at 2.5 million children born between 1999 and 2019 and found that, and I quote, acetaminophen use during pregnancy was not associated with children's risk of autism, ADHD, or intellectual disability. But Kennedy doesn't need to worry about that. That's not evidence. It's politics. Because we, and again, not just Kennedy, I fear, have lost our ability to accept that evidence might prove us wrong. That old Adam Savage joke from Mythbusters has finally become an epistemic commonplace.
I reject your reality and substitute my own.
Listen, truth is messy, and knowing things is hard. I get that. Again, that's why we have an education system, so that we can cultivate people with expertise in those areas where expertise is most crucial and complex. I'm a writing professor with a degree in nonfiction. I can't evaluate the conflicting data on the relationship between pharmaceuticals and fetal neurological development. But Kennedy is a lawyer with a worm in his brain. Neither can he. And yet, here he is, telling the FDA that he knows better than they do. And here is the most mom said I have to say sorry FDA recommendation that I have ever read.
It is important to note that while an association between acetaminophen and neurological conditions has been described in many studies, a causal relationship has not been established, and there are contrary studies in the scientific literature. It's also noted that acetaminophen is the only over-the-counter drug approved for use to treat fevers during pregnancy, and high fevers in pregnant women can pose a risk to their children. Additionally, aspirin and ibuprofen have well-documented adverse impacts on the fetus.
This paragraph feels like the FDA screaming, the science isn't here. If Frances Oldham Kelsey were still working at the FDA, it seems like that's what she'd be doing. Because the science isn't here. Even Kennedy knows it.
Oh, this is not dispositive. It is not proof. We're doing the studies to make the proof.
He is calling for evidence-based medicine while admitting that he is fabricating evidence to support a conclusion he has already come to in the absence of evidence. He is doing bullshit. Because Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is not an expert. Not here, not on this, but expertise is dead. Everything I believe is true, and everything you believe is politics. My opinions are facts, and your opinions are feelings. The force driving Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is the same force that allows Sam Altman to get up in front of his investors and say that what is functionally a very fancy set of story dice is equivalent to a panel of PhD-level experts. And to have that claim parroted by the press in outlet after outlet, even as everyone who uses it knows that this is bullshit. So, sure, ban Tylenol, ban circumcision, put glue on your pizza and eat at least one rock every day. Fuck it, why not? Put your bullshit in my email, in my software, let it seep into every pore of our education system. No, we can do more. Who needs education anymore anyway? More. Let the bullshit be your friend. Let it be your girlfriend. Let the bullshit be your therapist. No, more. Let the bullshit be a cabinet member. Let the bullshit be your doctor. Let the bullshit fight your wars. Let the bullshit be your God. And you know what? That's not enough. You know what the real problem is? People think athletes are good again. So let's make GOAT. Let's make a sequel to Happy Gilmore. More. Let's bring back Air Bud. Fuck it. You know who else is too full of themselves? Dog actors. So go fuck yourselves, canine actors. Let's hire a random dog via TikTok, because nothing is true and everything is stupid, and God save Canute, the Viking King of England. We are so deeply steeped in bullshit that we have forgotten that there used to be such a thing as truth. The AI infection is evidence that we have already failed. It has taken root because we have already given up on the very possibility that we can know things. Nothing is true, and everything is stupid. And so, of course, when the dean is sitting in his office trying to figure out what to do, and Sam Altman falls out of his ceiling and tells him that he has a doctor in his pocket that knows everything, of course the dean will buy it. Because the dean has already bought the deeper bullshit that everybody knows that nobody knows anything anymore. The referees can no longer tell who's a dog and who's a person. So, let's say you're the dean.
Come on, I'm Dean.
It's a few years after you've sorted out the Chang mess, and you finally have got the study group on your side, but you still have a problem. The problem is a former student. More specifically, the problem is the student's degree. The problem is the degree that Greendale has allegedly awarded to that student, who is not allegedly, but verifiably, a dog.
In 2001, a Staffordshire Terrier mix named Ruffles took up residence on Greendale's campus. By 2008, Ruffles had earned a bachelor's degree. Not a 2-year degree, a 4-year degree.
For some incomprehensible reason, people are using Ruffles to suggest that an institution that would grant a degree to a dog is perhaps not doing a great job at education. Incidentally, this tactic has been used in real life before with some success. Some might even suggest that a system that would give a degree to a dog is essentially bullshit. So what do? One approach is to suggest that Ruffles is a bad dog.
This is Ruffles. She'd like you to believe she's a college graduate and a good girl, but Ruffles is anything but.
Personally, I find this distasteful, but that's because I know in my heart that all dogs are good dogs. A second approach is to review Ruffles' transcript. This reveals to you that the dog did not get a degree because of an unpaid fine.
Unpaid library fees, $15. Diploma withheld until payment remitted. No degree.
Thank goodness, Ruffles did not, technically, receive a degree from our education system. But Ruffles got all the grades, earned all the units, met all the requirements. Ruffles didn't get a degree, but Ruffles earned one.
The sad truth is that a dog can get a degree here.
God, what are you supposed to do with that level of failure?
It is wrong to put temptation in the path of any nation for fear they should succumb and go astray. So when you are requested to pay up or be molested, you will find it better policy to say, "We never pay anyone Dane-geld, no matter how trifling the cost, for the end of that game is oppression and shame, and the nation that plays it is lost."
It must have been so discomforting living in Æthelred's England. Maybe your mother was murdered by Vikings. Maybe they burned your house down, and so you moved up the coast a ways. And then maybe they burned that house down too. So maybe you moved inland, hoping that you'd be far enough away from the water that the Vikings wouldn't come for you again. And maybe in your new village, the magistrate, he says to you, don't worry, we have help. There are people here to keep you safe from the Vikings. And maybe you do feel safe for just a minute, until you see that the man who's going to keep you safe from the Vikings is the Viking who murdered your mother. When it comes to so-called AI, we have paid the Dane-geld. In so many places, but especially and extremely in the education system. We have bought into program after program, signed contract after contract, and we have engaged with hopeful and open minds and, in my estimation, a very unacademic credulity. And we have let AI seep deep into the foundation of our educational system. And Kipling, for as much as he was so wrong about so many things, was right about this much at least. The end of this game is oppression and shame, and the nation that plays it is lost. My students tell me they don't want to use AI. Admittedly, they might be lying because my own position is pretty clear. But because we have paid the Dane-geld in the classes that they are supposed to take from the teachers and administrators who are supposed to be teaching them, there's AI everywhere. God, what are we supposed to do with that level of failure? Here is what you do.
This is Ruffles. Ruffles was a student at Greendale Community College. She came really close to getting a degree, which means two things. She's an exceptional dog, and Greendale really needs to get it together. We're working on it. We're working hard. And the good news is when you work hard at Greendale, no matter who or what you are, it pays off. Right, Ruffles? No, Jesus.
Æthelred II of England, called the Unready, was not able to get rid of the Dane. He was exiled, and for a time Canute reigned not only as King of England, but of the North Sea Empire, of which England was simply one vassal state. But there is no North Sea Empire anymore, and there is still an England, because the Vikings could take England, but they could not hold it. The kingship passed from Canute to his son Harold Harefoot, and then to Canute's other son Harthacnut. It was a time of awesome names. Harthacnut tried to rule England like a Dane, and the English nobles overthrew him like Englishmen, which is to say, they politely waited for him to die of natural causes, and then pretended he had appointed Edward, son of Æthelred, as his successor. I am not a historian. I'm not an expert. I'm a neophyte trying to make sense of a story that is in many ways beyond me. I say that because I do, after all, have a concern for truth. I am oversimplifying what I remember from my medieval studies classes and gathered from Wikipedia and a brief abortive attempt to read Tom License's Edward the Confessor, Last of the Royal Blood, which I purchased, opened, and slammed shut in overwhelmed terror. The experts themselves are not in agreement because the primary sources are not in agreement, so take this for what it is. A layman's attempt to make meaning, but still, hopefully, a step above raw bullshit. What is certain is this. Æthelred paid the Dane-geld, and the end of that game is oppression and shame, and Æthelred's England was lost. What is certain is this. Harthacnut, the last Viking king of England, died, and Edward the Confessor, son of Æthelred II, once called the Unready, reclaimed his father's throne. The Vikings could take England, but they could not hold it. I wish I had an easy way to unmire our education system from the AI bullshit in which it is drowning itself, or to undo the epistemic collapse that has opened the door to fascism, or shit, even just to get the new Air Bud movie shelved. But I have no easy solution. There is plenty that I don't know. But what is certain is this. They could take it, but they could not hold it. They can take it, but they cannot hold it. They can take it, but they cannot hold it. They can take it, but they cannot hold it. We have lost. We are losing. But we are not lost. Postscript. I can pinpoint the exact moment in my notes where suddenly this essay about Air Bud became an essay about fascism. I write this postscript having just done my first full read-through of the script, and I am feeling what I imagine you might be feeling. I am angry I am tired. There is a despair inside me somewhere that I'm trying hard not to make eye contact with. I'm feeling the same feeling that I do when I look at this picture of what has happened to the White House. The feeling of this can't be happening, except no. It's a feeling of this can't have happened. And then the knowledge that it has. It has already happened. I believe what I said. They can take it, but they cannot hold it. But unfortunately, that doesn't tell me how we take it back. And I am not an expert in how to fight back. But I have some good news on that front.
Me am.
Sam am. In addition to being my weird brain twin and the person who has best tried to defend you from all of the more chaotic elements of this essay, Sam am an activist and an organizer, and Sam am currently putting out a phenomenal series of videos called Changemakers, where Sam am explaining how to think about and talk about and do fighting back. What the alt-right playbook is to rhetoric, Changemakers is to protest and resistance. If I have left you thinking, okay, but what do I do? Go watch Changemakers, and Sam am going to explain it to you. This video has taken ages to make, and while there are many who have supported me in my nonsense, there are two people to whom I must extend special thanks. First, Bonnie Judd, lead animal trainer for Airbud's 7th Inning Fetch. I emailed her a series of increasingly unhinged questions, expecting fully that I would never hear from her. She responded offering a phone interview, and that call ended up being one of the most delightful, informative, and engaging conversations I've ever had. Ms. Judd gave freely of her time and expertise, overwhelmed me with her enthusiasm and passion for her work, and demonstrated a personal love and relationship with each of those dogs she'd worked with 20 years ago that fully confirmed my faith in the unique capabilities of canine actors. I cannot express enough appreciation for Ms. Judd's work. Second, John Paul Brammer. When I messaged him that I am not an insane person, except in the way that all essayists are insane, I did not realize that I was speaking to a fellow traveler. After stumbling upon the tweet, I started exploring some of his work, and he is absolutely one of the best essayists I've encountered in recent memory. His essay on Cloud Dancer, the 2025 Pantone Color of the Year, is at least as good an experimental fugue on the dissolution of reality as this one. His meditation, no more, no less, on Applebee's OM Cheeseburger May Change Your Religion, and his review of an Irish-Mexican fusion restaurant in Jersey City brought back a visceral memory of my Californian horror at discovering the only Mexican restaurant we could find in Muncie, Indiana was called Carlos O'Kelly's. Read his stuff, it's amazing. To quote the poet,
"You apologize, I wasn't really familiar with your game."
Thanks always to Sam and Max for enduring the exhausting absurdity of my friendship, to Pillar of Garbage for a truly incomprehensible amount of support with the script and planning for this video, to everyone who gave voice to the sources I used, including Katie of Katie and Catburger, who heard the question, "Can you pretend to be Julia Roberts giving an Oscar to a dog?" and said yes without hesitation. If you've noticed that my audio does not sound like ass this time, thanks Sam. Thanks also to everyone who drew me Vikings, including Cybergrape UK, Max, Kai After Kai, some of Sam's friends, my wife, my children, my godchildren, some generous friends and strangers at a church retreat, and finally, thanks of course to my patrons who help make weird nonsense like this achievable and who remind me that there are, in fact, people out there who are into this sort of thing. If you join my Patreon, you'll gain access to the community Discord server I share with Sam and Max and some other wonderful creators, and you will see that I am, in fact, like this all the time. Be warned and be welcome. Bless you all.